Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to the Territory of Cinema channel. If you enjoy our content, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a thumbs up. Today, we are going to discuss the movie Fast and Furious from 2009. The humid air of Los Angeles practically crackled with unspoken tension as Dominic Toretto, having successfully evaded the law after that first wild street racing escapade, found himself back on the run. He was a man defined by loyalty and a near-mythical reputation behind the wheel, his upbringing in a tough environment shaping his worldview. Family first, always. His current refuge was a dimly lit garage, the scent of high-octane fuel clinging to everything, a world away from the polished veneer of legitimate business. Then the call came, dragging him back into the fray. Brian O'Connor, the former undercover agent who had traded his badge for the thrill of the open road and a deep connection to Toretto's world, was working a dangerous assignment. Brian, whose early career saw him wrestling with his conscience between duty and his growing understanding of the racing brotherhood, was now feeding information to the FBI, trying to bring down a major player in the Miami drug trade. The target was Carter Verone, a ruthless importer operating out of the sun-drenched, neon-lit chaos of Miami. To get close enough to Verone, Brian needed a reliable driver, someone who wouldn't flinch when the pedal hit the floor. He needed Dom. Toretto agreed, but on his terms. He wasn't doing this for the cops, he was doing it for a chance at a clean slate, a pathway back to a semblance of a normal life, and perhaps a quiet moment of reconciliation with the ghosts of his past. He brought along Letty Ortiz, the woman whose own survival instincts and fierce driving skill were legendary on the streets, someone who understood Dom's silent language better than anyone. The job was simple, yet impossibly risky. Go undercover, participate in Verone's illegal street racing circuit, and lure out the drug lord's money handlers. They were given ridiculously souped-up cars, machines that screamed defiance at speed limits, perfect tools for navigating the dangerous waters of Verone's operation. Miami became their playground and their cage. The races weren't just about speed, they were brutal demonstrations of power and nerve. Brian and Dom, their shared history, a complicated tapestry of betrayal and unwavering trust, found themselves side by side again, their coordination as a team unnervingly perfect, a testament to countless hours spent perfecting the art of the drift and the perfect gear shift. The plot thickened with the introduction of Mia Toretto, Dom's sister, who couldn't stay away from the danger surrounding her brother and Brian. Her presence added another layer of vulnerability to an already volatile situation. The climax arrived not in a single high-speed chase, but through a meticulously planned double-cross. They had secured the money, a massive haul, but Verone was never going to let them walk away easily. The final sequence was a symphony of controlled chaos, cars flying, gunfire echoing off the concrete canyons of Miami. The plan involved using a massive, custom-built muscle car, a true titan of the road, to snatch the cash right out from under Verone's nose. It was a performance worthy of their reputation, a blur of precision driving where hesitation meant death. They didn't just escape. They dismantled Verone's operation piece by piece with horsepower and audacity. In the end, while they delivered the money, the authorities were left scrambling. Dom and Brian, having proven their capabilities one last time, Brian reaffirming his allegiance to the freedom of the road, Dom securing a tenuous freedom, vanished back into the shadows. The bond between them solidified not by law, but by shared adrenaline and mutual survival. They drove away from the flashing lights, two titans of the tarmac disappearing toward the next horizon. The relentless sun of Miami seemed to beat down on everything, mirroring the intense pressure Brian and Dom were under. Brian, always the more outwardly polished of the two, walked the tightrope of his double life with a quiet intensity. His internal conflict, that nagging pull between the structured order he once represented and the exhilarating anarchy he now embraced, was palpable in the way he gripped the steering wheel, always ready to accelerate away from commitment. He'd always possessed an innate ability to read a situation, a skill honed not just in the academy, but in the close quarters of Toretto's garage, where subtle shifts in body language spoke volumes. Dom, conversely, wore his danger openly. He moved with the grounded certainty of a man who knew exactly what he was capable of, a reputation built street by unforgiving street. When he spoke of family, it wasn't a platitude, it was the core principle that had dictated every major choice in his life, especially those decisions that landed him in hot water with the law. His eyes, often shadowed beneath the brim of a worn cap, held the ghosts of past losses, which only fueled his need to protect the few people he allowed into his inner circle. Letty, effortlessly cool even when facing down armed thugs, was the fierce, unspoken anchor for Dom. Her background demanded resilience. She navigated life with a driver's instinct, hard braking before a corner you couldn't see around, and flooring it when the path cleared. She and Dom shared a language of mutual understanding, forged in years of shared risks, a bond that often made Brian feel like the outsider looking in, despite his history with the crew. The tension inside Verone's sprawling, heavily guarded compound was suffocating. Verone himself was a creature of avarice, his wealth built on fear and high-speed transactions. Every encounter with him was a calculated dance, where a wrong word or a misplaced glance could end in a permanent, tragic stop. The plan to extract the cash needed surgical precision. It involved coordinating multiple vehicles in a high-stakes ballet across the city's crowded arteries. When the moment came, it wasn't just about speed, it was about execution under duress. Dom piloted his massive Charger, a beast of American engineering, with an almost spiritual connection, weaving through traffic while Brian provided the crucial distraction. There was a moment, mid-chase, where their cars briefly aligned, side panels almost kissing, a silent acknowledgement of their shared history and renewed commitment to the moment, a true symbiosis of driver and machine. Mia's involvement, though brief, ratcheted up the emotional stakes. Seeing her risk herself for them only reinforced Dom's protective instincts and Brian's awareness of what he stood to lose again if this went sideways. The final getaway was less about outrunning the police, who were now converging on the scene, and more about outsmarting Verone's heavy security detail. They didn't just drive, they engineered obstacles, using their superior vehicle control to turn the environment against their pursuers. They made their exit not with a whisper but with a roar, leaving behind a scene of financial devastation for Verone. Watching the Miami skyline recede in the rearview mirror, the weight of the near miss settled. They had navigated the storm, not by adhering to any external code, but by trusting the internal code they had written for themselves, the code of the road, the code of family. They drove into the next uncertain future, two legends once again one step ahead of the narrative being written about them. The lingering humidity of Miami seemed to cling to their skin long after they had crossed the state line, a constant reminder of the razor's edge they had just danced upon. For Brian, the aftermath brought a familiar, hollow clarity. Having successfully played the part of the compromised agent, turned loyal street operative, he felt the strange, almost addictive pull of having achieved his objective while simultaneously violating every rule he had once sworn to uphold. His entire career, a trajectory marked by pivotal choices, letting Dom walk, choosing the thrill over the desk, culminated in this precarious equilibrium. He drove with a lighter touch now, perhaps, but the shadows under his eyes suggested sleep was a luxury still unavailable. Dom, however, seemed rejuvenated by the chaos. He was a man who found his truest self only when tested by impossible odds. The sheer audacity of pulling off the cash heist, effectively robbing a major trafficker under the nose of federal agents, was a testament to his philosophy: if you trust your machine and your crew, anything is possible. His focus had always been narrow and deep: protect the immediate circle. Seeing Mia safe, seeing Letty's unwavering nerve, reaffirmed his belief that the risks inherent in his chosen life were worth the infrequent, profound moments of genuine connection. Their escape vehicle, perhaps a forgotten icon from a previous life, felt strangely comfortable. A rolling sanctuary. It wasn't the flashiest car in the fleet, but it was reliable, a quality Dom valued far more than sheer horsepower. He treated the engine like a living entity, his hands moving over the worn leather of the steering wheel with the familiarity of an old friend. Reflecting on the operation, it was the small moments that resonated. The millisecond hesitation when Brian had to choose between taking out a pursuing security vehicle or ensuring Dom had a clear path. A hesitation that vanished as he smoothly executed a perfect drift to block the threat. That moment proved that the fundamental trust, once nearly shattered, had been meticulously rebuilt on the foundation of shared adrenaline. Even the silence in the car held meaning. It wasn't awkward. It was the comfortable quiet of men who had communicated volumes through gear shifts and tire squeals. They weren't discussing warrants or indictments. They were simply existing in the space carved out by their mutual defiance of the expected outcome. They had manipulated the system that sought to control them, using the very speed and recklessness the law feared as their shield and their weapon. As the familiar asphalt gave way to less traveled roads, there was an unspoken understanding. This temporary freedom was a loan, not a gift, and they would continue to live on borrowed time, chasing the next horizon, where the road was wide open and the rules were theirs to bend. The journey inland was characterized by long stretches of highway, where the only companions were the steady hum of the engine and the relentless pursuit of anonymity. They carried the weight of their recent success, a tangible resource in the form of the recovered funds, though they handled it with a cautious detachment, knowing that wealth earned through such a high-stakes maneuver only attracted further unwanted attention. Dom, ever the pragmatist, made arrangements for the money to be dispersed discreetly, minimizing their exposure. It wasn't about getting rich. It was about ensuring the operational stability of their small, nomadic family. Their next destination remained purposefully vague, a place where the law's reach felt attenuated, perhaps a quiet corner of the American West where the horizons stretched out indefinitely, offering the illusion of endless escape. For Brian, this nomadic existence had become the only reality he truly understood. The structured life of an agent now felt distant, almost fictional, like a black-and-white photograph compared to the vivid, high-contrast reality of life on the edge. He found himself constantly scanning reflections in storefront windows, not out of paranoia, but out of habit, a vestige of training that now served only to monitor the presence of his brother figure beside him. Letty, ever vigilant, took the wheel for the longer overnight stretches. Her skill at blending in was unmatched. She could inhabit any small-town environment, her tough exterior melting into a guise of normalcy that made surveillance impossible. She drove with an almost meditative focus, her appreciation for the mechanics of the car deeper than most. For her, the speed was secondary. The control, the intimate knowledge of how the vehicle responded to the slightest input was the real drug. As they traveled, the conversations, when they occurred, circled back not to the past dangers, but to the future requirements. How long could they maintain this state of flux? Could Dom ever truly shed the identity of the fugitive? Brian wrestled with the idea that his own future was now irrevocably tied to Dom's, a bond forged not in shared blood, but in shared brushes with disaster. He realized that loyalty, for him, had evolved from a duty to an external organization into a profound, almost sacred commitment to the man who had first shown him what true, unconditional acceptance felt like. They stopped only when necessary, preferring the anonymity of roadside diners where the coffee was strong and the conversation minimal. In these brief interludes of normalcy, away from the roar of V8s, they existed in a state of heightened awareness, forever poised for the next inevitable confrontation. They were fugitives, yes, but more accurately, they were free agents operating outside the jurisdiction of conventional rules, their only jurisdiction being the pavement ahead. The road ahead was wide, and for the moment, they had the speed to meet whatever challenge it presented. the landscape slowly morphed from the subtropical haze of the south to the vast, scrub-dotted expanses of the southwest. The air grew drier, the sky larger, and the feeling of being perpetually watched lessened, though never entirely evaporated. They settled for a time in a nondescript town near the border, a place where transient workers and fading dreams congregated, offering a perfect camouflage for those looking to disappear into the background noise of America. Dom used his mechanical acumen to secure odd jobs, working under assumed names in dusty repair shops where the owners cared more about getting the job done cheap than asking about paperwork. He approached every repair, every engine swap, with the same meticulous focus he applied to high-speed maneuvering. For Dom, fixing something broken, whether a transmission or a frayed relationship, was a tangible act of restoring order to chaos. He rarely smiled during these stints, but the deep lines around his eyes would soften when Mia would occasionally check in, a lifeline connecting him to the world that still held a semblance of stability. Brian, meanwhile, found himself restless. The lack of immediate, life-or-death pressure was starting to fray his nerves. He was accustomed to operating at the extreme edge. The slow burn of lying low felt like a form of slow strangulation. He spent his off hours meticulously maintaining their vehicles, treating the cars not just as tools, but as extensions of his own need for control. His expertise in reading law enforcement patterns, a skill honed during his undercover days, became an invaluable, silent asset, allowing him to predict potential threats long before they materialized. He was constantly running scenarios in his head, calculating escape vectors even when parked in a quiet lot. Letty thrived in the ambiguity of their transient life. She found a fierce satisfaction in earning their keep through legitimate, if hard, work. One afternoon, she took on a local amateur drag race, not for the prize money, which was paltry, but to test the limits of their current vehicle against the local competition. She didn't just win, she dominated, leaving the established local heroes utterly bewildered by the sudden appearance of a driver whose skills seemed imported from a much higher echelon of racing. The victory was a small, necessary assertion of their ongoing capability, a quiet message to the world that even in hiding, they remained masters of their domain. There was an underlying tension about the future that lingered beneath the surface of their shared routine. They knew this quiet wasn't permanent. They were like coiled springs, waiting for the inevitable moment when their past would catch up, or when the lure of a new challenge would prove too strong to resist. Brian looked at Dom one evening, watching him tinker under the hood of an old pickup truck, realizing that for Dom, freedom wasn't about being uncatchable. It was about choosing what he was willing to be caught for, and right now, it was simply the integrity of their shared existence on the road. They were moving targets, defined by the horsepower they commanded and the loyalty they fiercely protected. The relative calm of the Southwest began to feel less like sanctuary and more like a temporary lull before a storm. The desert air, once a refreshing change from the coastal humidity, now seemed to amplify the silence, making every unexpected sound, a distant siren, a car backfiring, a jolt to their systems. This prolonged period of low-intensity living was proving to be a different kind of stress test. The adrenaline addiction was being replaced by a creeping sense of existential unease. Dom, feeling the weight of responsibility for keeping everyone safe and unseen, became even more reserved. He rarely spoke of Los Angeles or Miami, preferring to focus on the immediate mechanics of survival, ensuring the cars were maintained with near-obsessive attention, sourcing parts that wouldn't draw undue attention from official channels. His inspiration was rooted in the philosophy of the street racer. Never surrender the advantage. Always keep your machine tuned for the unexpected pivot. He carried a deep-seated skepticism regarding any form of external authority, viewing the law as an inconvenience designed to limit genuine human connection and freedom. Brian, however, struggled most acutely with the stillness. His mind, trained for rapid assessment and infiltration, chafed at the slow, repetitive nature of hiding. He found himself drawn to studying old race footage on a small, battered laptop, analyzing the driving styles of legends from various eras, not just for technical tips, but for the psychological warfare inherent in high-stakes competition. He was wrestling with the remnants of his past life. Every time he helped Dom disguise a vehicle or forge a temporary identity, he was actively burning the bridge back to the structured life he had once almost reclaimed. This duality, the constant need to look inconspicuous while being internally hyper-aware of every operational detail, was beginning to take its toll, manifesting as insomnia punctuated by sudden, intense urges to just drive, fast and aimlessly. Letty, the anchor, noticed the subtle shifts in both men. She saw Brian's fidgeting hands and Dom's increasingly distant gaze. She initiated the breaking of the routine. She didn't suggest a race. She suggested movement. "We're rusting here," she remarked one evening, polishing the chrome of an engine block until it gleamed like a mirror. She knew that stagnation was the true enemy for their kind. This realization sparked a low-key decision. They needed to relocate, perhaps further north, toward a place rumored to have underground motorsport scenes, far removed from major metropolitan scrutiny. The move itself became their next operational challenge. They couldn't simply drive. They had to blend the caravan of their essential vehicles, modified for durability over flash, into the regular flow of commercial traffic. The planning was intricate, focusing on timing, route scouting via paper maps rather than digital dependence, and establishing multiple contingency plans for mechanical failure or unexpected checkpoints. It was a shared understanding that true family meant accepting this continuous state of flight. They packed their meager possessions, the emotional core of their bond being the shared memory of chaos survived. As they pulled out of the dusty town under the cover of a late moonless night, the engines starting up with a low, confident rumble. They weren't running from anything specific. They were simply continuing the trajectory they had chosen, the open road as their only true sovereign territory. The eastward push took them across deserts that seemed to stretch into infinity, the sheer emptiness mirroring the vast uncertainty of their future. Their convoy, consisting of 3 heavily modified, deliberately unassuming vehicles, moved with the practiced stealth of a seasoned military unit rather than a band of outlaws. Each driver was hyper-aware of the other, communicating through subtle light flashes and near imperceptible changes in speed, a silent language forged in shared near-death experiences. Dom had taken the lead, his focus absolute. He understood that the greatest danger now was not a police raid, but complacency. He drove his primary machine not just skillfully, but almost ritualistically, ensuring every nut, bolt, and fluid was perfect. His inspiration seemed to stem directly from his late father's tough lessons about self-reliance. You couldn't trust anyone to maintain your lifeline, which, in their world, was the performance envelope of the car. He kept the radio tuned low, picking up snippets of local traffic reports, filtering them for anomalies that might signal closer surveillance. Brian, taking the middle vehicle, was in his element again, the act of surveillance and counter-surveillance providing a welcome if dangerous structure to his days. He enjoyed the technical dance of masking their vehicle signatures, using old electromagnetic baffling techniques he'd learned in his brief, ill-fated stint with federal agencies, now weaponized for his own freedom. He found a peculiar kind of peace in this necessary deception, a feeling that he was finally utilizing his specific skill set for a purpose he truly believed in: protecting his chosen family. The road offered him clarity that the sterile confines of a precinct office never could. Letty, bringing up the rear, was their human sensor grid. Her observational skills were second to none. She noticed the older model sedan that seemed to be consistently 4 cars behind them for over 300 miles, the driver consistently wearing the same style of sunglasses regardless of the changing light conditions. This wasn't a cop. Cops were too professional or too sloppy. This felt like a professional tale, someone hired, someone looking for them specifically, a sign that the repercussions of the Miami job hadn't entirely dissipated. She sent a coded message forward, a quick flick of the high beams 3 times, signaling potential spot. Dom acknowledged the signal immediately, not with panic, but with calculated aggression. They couldn't afford to be followed into an unknown territory. He directed them off the main interstate onto a crumbling secondary highway known for its poorly maintained surface and winding canyons. This terrain favored the superior handling and raw power of their customized rides, while severely penalizing any vehicle not built to endure relentless punishment. As the terrain grew treacherous, Letty confirmed her suspicion. The tail was pushing through but struggling. Dom's decision to intentionally seek out punishing roads was a brilliant piece of applied psychology and mechanical mastery. It forced the follower to choose between abandoning the pursuit or risking their equipment. For a brief, exhilarating moment, as they took a blind, high-speed corner, Brian caught a glimpse of the pursuer's vehicle losing control slightly, a brief shudder of fear mixed with triumph crossing his face. They had successfully shed the unwanted shadow, not through hiding, but by proving they were faster, tougher, and infinitely more connected to the ground beneath their tires. The road ahead remained open, but the message was clear. They carried a price tag, and someone was actively trying to collect. The transition from the arid plains to the greener, more densely forested regions of the north brought a change in atmosphere, a shift from open confrontation to the potential for ambush. The narrow, winding roads that Dom had chosen to shake their tail were both a blessing and a curse. They were hard to follow, but they also offered countless blind spots where danger could easily materialize unseen. The brief victory over the hired surveillance had been a necessary affirmation of their continuing competence, but it also confirmed that their notoriety was spreading, that the ripples from the Veroni affair were expanding across the map. For Dom, this realization solidified his protective stance. He viewed every mile gained as a temporary loan against future trouble. His commitment to the immediate present was absolute. He lived in the milliseconds between throttle input and tire grip. He wasn't driven by the pursuit of wealth or fame, but by a deep, almost elemental need to maintain the integrity of his chosen unit. He carried the weight of everyone's safety, a burden he would never explicitly voice, preferring to communicate his assurance through the unwavering rhythm of his driving. He remembered the early days, the raw, untamed energy of amateur street racing, and found that even now, operating on the margins of society, the core thrill remained the same. Mastering the machine against the odds. Brian, observing Dom's intense concentration, understood the precarious balance they maintained. He was the strategist, the one capable of seeing beyond the immediate race line to the broader tactical map. He began using his old FBI-honed skills in a new way, not to anticipate arrests, but to predict the next major motorsport event, a gathering large enough to offer anonymity, yet significant enough to offer opportunity. He recognized that their need for resources and their need to stay moving were symbiotic. They couldn't hide forever, but they could certainly outmaneuver the hunters by moving to places where large crowds and high-speed action provided the perfect cover. Letty, always the most grounded, was the one who bridged the gap between Dom's intensity and Brian's analytical nature. She was the emotion in the machine, capable of sensing when the psychological pressure was mounting too high. She found the new driving environment exhilarating, the damp asphalt offering predictable grip for aggressive cornering, a perfect foil for her style, which favored precision slides over brute force acceleration. She recalled a time, long ago, when she and Dom had barely escaped a tight spot in the city using coordinated maneuvers, and she saw in the current teamwork a matured version of that same desperate synergy. As they neared a rumored location known for secretive, high-stakes, unsanctioned races, a place where money and adrenaline flowed freely away from prying eyes, the mood shifted subtly. The constant evasion began to feel like preparation for a return to their true calling. They weren't just running, they were heading toward a confrontation, albeit one fought on their terms, the asphalt arena. There was a quiet, shared understanding that the next phase of their journey would involve stepping back into the spotlight, just enough to secure their position before fading back into the obscurity they desperately craved. They were assembling the pieces for their next necessary performance, ready to prove once again that when the road demands a master, they would answer the call. The rumor of the high-stakes gathering led them toward a sprawling, semi-abandoned industrial complex nestled outside a major metropolitan hub, a perfect, cavernous stage for those who preferred anonymity over bright lights. The air here felt heavy with potential energy, the scent of unburnt fuel mixing with the metallic tang of old machinery. This wasn't just an amateur meet. The whispers spoke of significant money-changing hands, attracting drivers whose reputations preceded them, and, inevitably, drawing the kind of attention they sought to avoid. Dom viewed the upcoming event not as a risk, but as a necessary transaction. He needed to gauge the competitive landscape, while simultaneously ensuring their resources remained viable. His strategy was less about winning the purse and more about establishing an unchallenged aura of dominance that would deter casual observers or low-level bounty hunters. He felt a familiar, almost nostalgic warmth around his crew. They were falling back into their rhythm, the shared purpose sharpening their edges. He looked at Brian, whose eyes held a glint of focused anticipation, and knew that Brian was ready to perform again, not as an agent, but as the consummate racer who had learned his best lessons on the street. Brian had used the travel time to research the key players expected at this venue, cross-referencing known contacts from his former life with the names circulating in the deep web racing forums. He recognized the danger wasn't just the other drivers, but the infrastructure surrounding the illegal betting, the organized crime elements that inevitably attached themselves to such high-value gatherings. He meticulously tuned his own ride, focusing on reliability under sustained stress rather than flashy modifications. His internal motivation was pure. Every successful maneuver here bought them more time, more distance, more safety for Dom and the others. The line between the cop and the criminal had long since dissolved into a muddy track, and Brian realized he preferred the integrity of the mud. Letty, meanwhile, was tasked with scouting the perimeter. She moved with an unnerving grace, blending into the shadows of the massive warehouses. She wasn't intimidated by the rough crowd. Having navigated the ruthless social dynamics of the street scene for years, she read aggression and intent instantly. She noted the security weak points, the emergency exits, and the best vantage points for cover should the night devolve into the inevitable fallout. Her true inspiration came from defying expectations, the expectation that a woman in this hyper-masculine environment should be a passenger or a distraction. For Letty, the control panel was her pulpit, and speed was her sermon. When they finally revealed their vehicles, purpose-built machines that looked deceptively subdued, the atmosphere shifted palpably. They weren't flamboyant, but they possessed an undeniable, latent power. Dom felt the familiar buzz as he took his place near the starting line, the roar of a dozen engines building into a unified, aggressive sound. He exchanged a final, meaningful glance with Brian across the starting markers. It wasn't a word, but a transmission of absolute reliance. Trust the speed, trust the plan, trust me. The starting light dropped, and the world dissolved into the familiar, necessary violence of acceleration. They were home, in the only place where the past and the future ceased to matter, the immediate, demanding present of the drag strip. The initial burst of speed was a cathartic release, a physical manifestation of all the pent-up tension from weeks of constrained movement. The massive torque of Dom's car slammed him back into the seat, the world outside blurring into streaks of industrial gray and harsh sodium light. This was not the chaotic, public street racing of their past. This was structured anarchy, a high-stakes exhibition where every participant understood the unwritten rules of lethal commitment. Brian, positioned strategically to monitor the race's integrity and any potential interference, found himself simultaneously exhilarated and deeply calculating. His focus was split. One half of his mind was dedicated to maintaining perfect pace alongside Dom, the other was constantly scanning the faces in the viewing areas and the security placements. He noticed the sharp, predatory look of the primary organizer, a man whose reputation suggested deep ties to international organized crime, far exceeding the scope of Verone. This gathering was clearly a nexus for much larger, more dangerous operations. Brian's early career as an agent had trained him to spot the cancer of criminality. Now, that training was crucial for defense rather than offense. He executed a perfect late apex drift, shaving tenths of a second by using the inertia of the turn to his advantage, a move that would have earned him a standing ovation in a sanctioned track event. Letty, running a slightly different, more nimble vehicle configured for agility over raw power, was operating in the middle-to-rear pack. She was tasked with protecting their flank from aggressive undercutting, particularly from drivers known for risky, illegal maneuvers like boxing rivals into walls. She handled the pressure with an icy calm. Her driving philosophy was always about conserving energy until the critical moment, a survival instinct honed from years of being underestimated. She caught sight of a few known enforcers positioned near the exits, confirming Brian's assessment. This race was less about sport and more about signaling allegiance or dominance to unseen masters. She utilized a sudden, controlled burst of nitrous oxide, not for speed, but to intimidate a driver attempting to run her wide, forcing him to back off abruptly. Dom, leading the charge, was running a near-perfect race, operating several degrees beyond the posted limits of his own machine. He wasn't just driving fast, he was anticipating the track's subtle imperfections, adjusting his line fractionally before the chassis even registered the need for correction. He wasn't looking at the finish line, he was looking past it, measuring the distance to the designated extraction point. The prize money was secondary to securing their exit strategy. During a particularly tight straightaway where all three vehicles were running neck and neck, a brief surge of pure, unadulterated brotherhood passed between them. It was a shared breath, a silent acknowledgement that they were operating at their peak, an almost spiritual alignment of driver, machine, and objective. As Dom crossed the unofficial finish line, a symbolic marker rather than a true conclusion, the predetermined signal was given. The objective wasn't to celebrate the win, it was to use the chaos of the race's end, the moment of distraction when bets were being settled and drivers were slowing, to initiate their swift departure. The money secured from the prearranged side wager was quickly transferred via a discreet, pre-planned handoff arranged by Brian during the race's middle stages. They didn't linger for congratulations or confrontation. They simply melted back into the shadows of the industrial complex, leaving behind a flurry of confusion, accusations, and the realization among the attendees that the Toretto crew had just used their organized event for a highly specialized extraction. The next leg of their journey was already charted, deeper underground, farther from the scrutiny they had temporarily courted. The retreat from the industrial hub was executed with the precision of a surgical strike. Instead of fleeing toward the open highway, a move Brian knew would make them easy targets for any organized tale, Dom steered them into the labyrinthine network of abandoned service tunnels and forgotten underpasses beneath the city. This subterranean world was a domain where GPS signals died, and high-powered pursuit vehicles became cumbersome liabilities, a place where pure, intimate knowledge of vehicle mechanics and tight space navigation reigned supreme. Dom felt a grim satisfaction in this environment. It stripped away the glamour and exposed the core skill. Here, his early life spent tinkering in dimly lit shops, understanding the very bones of an engine, became a decisive advantage. He navigated the tight, debris-strewn passages not by sight alone, but by the subtle vibration felt through the steering column, the faint sound of loose gravel under the tires translating into distance and angle. This was Toretto's element, fighting the environment itself. Brian, driving slightly behind, used the echoes bouncing off the concrete walls to map their surroundings in real time, an almost synesthetic application of his tactical training. He was acutely aware of the irony. He was using skills honed to enforce the very laws they were now circumventing, but the objective felt undeniably purer, the preservation of his found family. He noticed Dom occasionally dipping the throttle just enough to let the sound reverberate back, a subtle communication that everything was under control, a reassurance often needed more by the person driving than the one receiving the message. Letty, bringing up the rear, found herself constantly battling the claustrophobia, yet using it to her advantage. In the close confines, aggressive driving was less about raw speed and more about perfectly timed bursts of power to correct sliding angles on slick, oil-stained concrete. She was the last line of defense, anticipating any aggressive attempts to follow them too closely. She remembered the feeling of being trapped in small spaces early in her life, and channeled that memory not into panic, but into sharp, decisive action. When they encountered a sudden partial collapse blocking one tunnel, Letty didn't hesitate. She found a narrow, seemingly impassable gap, barely wide enough for her lightweight chassis, and expertly maneuvered through it, then used a carefully timed blast of high beams to signal the all-clear to Dom, who followed her line with rock-steady confidence. Their eventual emergence from the underground system was timed perfectly with the early morning shift change in local security patrols, allowing them to blend onto a legitimate commuter route disguised amongst mundane traffic. They drove for hours in a silence born of exhaustion and success. The funds secured were enough to allow them a period of true respite, a chance to settle somewhere stable, perhaps even build something legitimate for a brief moment. As the sun finally broke over a new, unfamiliar landscape, the tension eased, replaced by a profound, weary gratitude. They hadn't just escaped. They had dictated the terms of their escape. Dom looked across at Brian, and for the first time in days allowed a small, genuine smile to surface. They were still hunted, but in that moment, driving toward an unknown future with the only people who truly understood them, they were undefeated. The road ahead demanded they keep moving, but for now, they had bought themselves breathing room, earned one more time through flawless execution and unbreakable trust. The road ahead, now stretching across unfamiliar Midwestern terrain, was characterized by endless fields of corn and a sky so wide it felt overwhelming after the oppressive closeness of the tunnels. They chose to settle temporarily in a small, anonymous town where anonymity was the local currency, a place where people minded their own business out of habit, not societal agreement. This time, the goal wasn't just survival, it was about embedding themselves deep enough to actually rest without the gnawing certainty of imminent pursuit. Dom insisted they use a portion of the recovered funds to secure a modest, unassuming property, a place with a detached garage that offered enough space to work without attracting undue attention. He began setting up his workspace immediately, treating the act of building a home base like tending to a vital piece of machinery. He needed tangible progress, something solid to anchor the family against the constant tide of chaos. His movements were slower now, less about reaction and more about measured construction. He found a quiet peace in the scent of sawdust and fresh concrete, a stark contrast to the smell of hot rubber and spilled oil. He was trying to build something that couldn't be stolen or repossessed by circumstance. Brian struggled the most with the forced stillness. He'd learned to equate forward motion with security. Lying low felt like deliberately exposing his blind spots. He spent his days in a state of hypervigilance, pacing the perimeter of their new property, mentally logging every passing vehicle, every unfamiliar face in the general store. His internal conflict resurfaced with sharp clarity. The thrill of the escape was addictive, but the guilt of perpetually abandoning the possibility of a clean life lingered. He kept a small burner phone active, not for contact but for running background checks on the property itself, ensuring they hadn't unwittingly bought into a trap. He needed a mission, and the absence of one made him feel dangerously exposed, like a finely tuned engine idling too long. Letty noticed Brian's restlessness and took it upon herself to bridge the gap. She understood that stability required more than just walls. It needed routine. She began using the ample space in the garage to work on her own project, a vintage muscle car she'd found rusting away in a nearby barn, paying for it with untraceable cash. Her process was slow, methodical restoration, sanding down layers of decay, carefully cleaning corrosion. It was a metaphor for their own situation, painstakingly stripping away the damage of the past to reveal the strong core underneath. She often worked side by side with Dom, the shared focus between them a quiet, comforting language. Her presence served as a subtle pressure release for Brian. Seeing her deliberately embracing the slow work reminded him that rebuilding was also a form of moving forward. Mia's occasional, carefully vetted calls became the emotional ballast for the entire operation. Hearing her voice, unburdened by the immediate danger they faced, reinforced why they were enduring this hiatus. Dom would listen intently, his face softening with a protective pride that only his sister could elicit, while Brian would hang back, an observer of the pure, untainted family connection that he desperately wanted to secure for himself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the cornfields, painting the sky in violent oranges and purples, Dom looked at the three of them. Letty focused on her engine block, Brian meticulously cleaning tools he didn't need to clean, and Mia's face on the small screen, and felt an overwhelming sense of proprietorship. They were scattered geographically, but fundamentally unified. He knew the quiet wouldn't last. The world always demanded a reckoning, but for this fleeting season, they were not running. They were fortifying. They were not just hiding out. They were reloading. The engines in the garage were waiting patiently, ready to roar back into action the moment the perimeter of their self-made peace was breached. The 2009 installment of the Fast and Furious franchise, often simply referred to by its eponymous title, serves as a crucial pivot point, skillfully maneuvering the series away from its street racing origins toward the globe-trotting, high-octane heist narratives that would define its later decades. This film is less about the purity of speed on an asphalt ribbon and more about the complicated reconciliation of found family and the heavy weight of the past. Central to this narrative arc is Dominic Toretto, portrayed by Vin Diesel. By 2009, Diesel had navigated a career path marked by bold choices, stepping away from Toretto after the first installment to pursue projects like the commercially successful but critically divisive XXX and the commercially disappointing but creatively ambitious The Chronicles of Riddick. His return here isn't just a contractual obligation, it's a necessary anchor for the entire franchise's mythology. Dom's ethos, family above all else, is tested when he is drawn back into the orbit of his estranged younger sister, Mia, and his enduring connection with Brian O'Connor, played by Paul Walker. Walker himself was carving out a niche that balanced blockbuster appeal with more grounded roles, demonstrating a genuine affinity for the character whose core conflict, a cop choosing loyalty over law, remains the emotional engine of the series. The plot plunges Dom and Brian into the dangerous, sun-drenched underworld of Los Angeles drug runners. The film effectively utilizes the inherent tension between the two leads. Brian, now an FBI agent, is attempting to go legitimate, while Dom is stubbornly rooted in his anti-establishment identity. Their reluctant alliance to take down drug lord Carter Verone is a forced exercise in mutual dependency. This dynamic works because it draws directly from the narrative inspiration of classic crime dramas, where adversaries must collaborate. There is a distinct influence of buddy cop tropes filtered through the lens of L.A. Ways tuner culture, though the focus shifts away from car modification aesthetics toward the vehicular performance as a means of executing elaborate plans. The introduction of Elena Neves, played by Gal Gadot, initially serves as a potential romantic foil for Dom, but more importantly, she represents the legitimate life he seems perpetually unable to grasp. Her presence underscores the constant pull between duty and desire that plagues both Toretto and O'Connor. The action sequences, particularly the border-crossing escape involving a massive tanker truck and a collection of classic muscle cars, are spectacles designed not just to impress with physics-defying stunts, but to showcase the character's innate, almost intuitive understanding of automotive capability under extreme pressure. What makes this entry resonate beyond simple spectacle is its commitment to solidifying the core theme. When Dom delivers lines about living life a quarter mile at a time, it is understood not as a celebration of sport, but as a philosophy of immediate, high-stakes engagement with the present moment, often at the expense of a stable future. The finale, which sees the successful heist and the subsequent decision by Brian and Mia to let Dom walk free, serves as the ultimate confirmation of their chosen allegiance. This act of betrayal against the FBI is the franchise's foundational myth moment, the moment where the rule of the street unequivocally supersedes the rule of the state, setting the stage for the global, untouchable crew that would soon emerge. The film successfully re-established the stakes of loyalty, ensuring that the Fast saga would remain tethered, however loosely, to the idea of an unbreakable, chosen family. The very air in this 2009 iteration feels thicker, saturated not just with exhaust fumes, but with unresolved history. Dom's return is steeped in the melancholy of someone who thought they had escaped their nature only to find it waiting patiently. Diesel brings a necessary gravitas to Dom. He is less the carefree street racer of the first film, and more a burdened patriarch, capable of immense tenderness toward Mia, but radiating a constant low-level threat toward the outside world. His motivation here is fundamentally defensive, protecting the legacy of the Toretto name and the purity of his bond with his sister. Brian O'Connor, meanwhile, embodies the tragic figure of the assimilated outsider. Walker portrays this internal conflict with a compelling vulnerability. He has traded the thrill of the chase for the sterile bureaucracy of federal law enforcement, and the drab suits he wears visually contrast sharply with Dom's perpetually casual, grease-stained aesthetic. When Brian and Dom reunite, there is an immediate, unspoken understanding that bridges the chasm of their differing paths. Their banter is laced with a decade of unspoken apologies and shared trauma from their initial run-in. The reignition of their partnership is born from shared necessity, but cemented by muscle memory. They know how the other thinks behind the wheel, a synergy that no amount of FBI training could replicate in Brian's new colleagues. The narrative's deployment of the heist structure acts as a perfect crucible for testing their rediscovered trust. Carter Verone, the antagonist, is deliberately written as a flat, purely transactional criminal, serving merely as a high-altitude obstacle. This contrast ensures that the audience remains focused not on the drug money, but on the relationship dynamics. The sequences where Brian and Dom must coordinate their vehicles, one driving the infiltrator car, the other the escape vehicle, are choreographed ballets of calculated risk. It's here that the film taps into a deep well of automotive enthusiast respect. It's not about the flashiest car, but the right car, utilized with perfect precision. The sheer physical exertion and mental focus required to execute the multi-car convoy ambush against Verone's armored vehicles communicates their professional level better than any badge or business card ever could. Furthermore, the film subtly deepens the mythology of the crew. While not yet the sprawling global operation of later films, the foundation is laid by characters like Tej Parker, played by Ludacris. Tej's inclusion elevates the team dynamic beyond just the drivers. He represents the necessary technical genius. His transition from a somewhat cynical gearhead informant to a committed operative signals that the Fast family is expanding to embrace specialists of all stripes, not just those with V8s under the hood. The emotional climax of the film isn't the successful acquisition of Verone's ledger. It is the silent moment after the final high-speed sequence when Brian and Mia look back at the chaos they've wrought. They have just risked everything. Brian's career, their freedom, to ensure Dom's survival and comfort. This choice is not rational. It is visceral. It's a decision rooted in blood ties and shared adrenaline binges, a pact sealed long before the film started and ratified in the wreckage of Verone's operation. The lingering shot of Dom driving off into the sunset, not arrested but deliberately let go, is the true promise of the franchise. No matter the scale of the crime or the reach of the authorities, the bond of family provides the ultimate, unshakable alibi. The deliberate decision to bring Dom and Brian back together in this specific Los Angeles setting feels like a return to the source code of their shared history. It is a narrative homecoming, even if that home is now tainted by years of divergent paths and compromises. The very architecture of the plot, an undercover operation gone awry, forces a confrontation with the compromises they have made. Dom is still the purist, the man who believes in absolute allegiance, viewing the world in stark binaries of loyalty or betrayal. Brian, conversely, is the man who has learned to operate in the gray zones, leveraging the system he simultaneously despises and utilizes for survival. The subtle visual language employed in their interactions reinforces this dichotomy. When they are working a job, Dom is often framed close to the ground, surrounded by the tangible grit of the machinery, embodying an elemental connection to the street. Brian is often seen from a slightly higher vantage point during FBI briefings, representing the detached, analytical perspective he has adopted. Yet, the moment they slide behind the wheel of a performance car, those visual barriers dissolve. The car becomes the neutral territory, the shared language where rank and agency dissolve into pure, synchronized motion. The synergy in the driving is a nonverbal declaration. They were built to move together. The introduction of Giselle Yashar, though more prominent in subsequent installments, begins its groundwork here through the established presence of powerful female characters who command respect on their own terms, echoing Mia's own fierce independence. Elena Neves, however, is integral to cementing Dom's sense of responsibility. She represents the domesticity he theoretically desires, but constantly sabotages through his lifestyle. Her eventual inclusion in the escape plan at the end, witnessing the choice made, shows her passing a critical test, signaling her acceptance into the periphery of the Toretto moral universe, even if she does not fully understand the intensity of the bond between the two men. The film's climax, specifically the successful hijacking of Verone's money convoy, is less about the technical execution of the stunt, though it is spectacular, and more about the emotional payoff of shared risk leading to shared reward. They are not just stealing cash, they are reclaiming their agency from the structure that sought to compartmentalize or neutralize them. When they are finally given the opportunity to vanish, their shared decision to let Dom walk free is a profound emotional act. For Brian, it is the final shedding of his FBI skin, a public declaration that his true commitment lies with the family he created on the streets, not the career he built in an office. For Dom, it is the validation that his philosophy works, that genuine connection will always overpower legal obligation. This ending is the franchise's first true statement of independence, establishing the ethos that they will always operate outside the established boundaries, bound only by the asphalt and the oath they share. The transition executed in this 2009 installment was a calculated, almost philosophical shift, moving the focus from the intimate, personal stakes of illicit street racing to the grander, more abstract concept of global operations dictated by necessity rather than sport. This widening of the scope required the characters to evolve their skill sets rapidly, moving from tuning imported street machines to mastering vehicular logistics on an international scale, even if those large-scale operations were only hinted at in the immediate aftermath. The success of the Verone takedown, which granted Dom his freedom, wasn't just a personal victory. It was the first proof of concept that this small, intensely loyal unit could disrupt established criminal empires. This foundational success immediately raised the stakes for the ensuing chapters. The freedom Dom achieved was inherently fragile, built upon a lie maintained by Brian's compromised integrity and the sacrifice of professional standing. The emotional residue of this choice lingers. Dom knows he owes more than simple gratitude to Brian. This debt becomes the invisible tether that will inevitably drag Brian back into Dom's orbit, regardless of how well he attempts to settle into domesticity or carve out a clean life. Walker's performance skillfully conveys this underlying tension. The momentary relief of success is always undercut by the knowledge that they have painted a massive target on their collective back, not from the law, but from the powerful forces within the criminal element they have just exposed. The film inadvertently functions as a bridge, smoothly connecting the raw, localized adrenaline of the original with the complex, multi-layered espionage that characterized the next decade. The chemistry between Diesel and Walker, refined over several years of absence, proved to be the series' most bankable asset. It is this deeply felt platonic devotion, a brotherhood forged in speed and danger, that provides the necessary emotional ballast for the increasingly unbelievable physical feats that follow. Without the grounding reality of their relationship, the subsequent narrative leaps into international espionage, and impossible physics would have crumbled under their own absurdity. Instead, we accept the impossible because we believe in the men performing the impossible for each other. The conclusion here is not a finale, it is a strategic regrouping, a quiet moment before the gathering storm of a world that refuses to let men like Dom and Brian simply retire. They have proven their worth, and now the world wants to put that talent to use, setting the stage for the series' true expansion. The necessity of Dom's subsequent entanglement is subtly foreshadowed by the sheer competence displayed during the Verone affair. It was not just luck or brute force, it was the refined, albeit unorthodox, application of specialized skills. Consider the sheer audacity of using multiple muscle cars to overwhelm high-grade armored vehicles. This required a level of pre-planning and operational synchronization that borders on military precision, far exceeding the requirements of street racing. It suggests that while Dom yearns for simplicity, the quiet life with Mia or Elena, his intrinsic talent is for orchestrating chaos with maximum efficiency. This inherent capability is a magnet for trouble, an irresistible force that greater society, whether legitimate or illicit, will inevitably attempt to harness. Brian's complicity in Dom's escape, while emotionally satisfying for the audience, represents a critical failure in his carefully constructed rehabilitation. He returns to the FBI structure carrying a profound secret, an invisible fracture in his loyalty that no amount of paperwork can mend. Paul Walker portrays the strain of this double life. In scenes where Brian must present findings or endure bureaucratic scrutiny, there is a palpable sense of performance, of a man reciting lines he no longer fully believes. His true self resides in the passenger seat next to Dom, or in the shared silence of a garage filled with horsepower. This inherent conflict ensures that Brian can never truly be at peace. He is forever looking over his shoulder, waiting for the moment his chosen family's actions will drag his professional life down in flames. Furthermore, the film subtly champions the idea that true expertise transcends official accreditation. Tej Parker's role, while smaller than in later installments, confirms this. Ludacris embodies the necessary intelligence that complements Diesel's raw power and Walker's tactical insight. Tej isn't bound by codes of honor or agency regulations. His allegiance is transactional until proven otherwise, and the shared success against Verone serves as that proof. This integration of diverse, highly specialized skill sets, the driver, the strategist, the tech expert, is the prototype for the future family. It establishes that effectiveness in their world is determined by capability and trust, not by departmental hierarchy. The lingering atmosphere of this film is one of temporary reprieve, a deep breath before the plunge. The final image of Dom speeding away, not into a sunset of peaceful retirement, but into the shadows of necessary anonymity, solidifies the series' core tragedy. These men are too skilled, too loyal, and too dangerous to ever truly assimilate. Their bond, celebrated in this chapter, becomes the very thing that prevents them from achieving simple happiness, guaranteeing that the wheel will always turn and pull them toward the next high-stakes endeavor to protect one another. The narrative's deliberate pacing in this installment underscores the emotional toll of reconciliation. It is not enough for Dom and Brian to simply be reunited. They must actively renegotiate the terms of their brotherhood under extreme duress. This friction between the past and the necessary future forms the film's dramatic backbone. Dom's presence in Los Angeles is an act of calculated risk, an emotional necessity that overrides any sense of self-preservation. He views every interaction with Mia and Brian through a lens of potential finality, an awareness that the life he leads is fundamentally incompatible with domestic stability. This inherent fatalism is what makes his moments of tenderness so profound. They are transient pockets of genuine feeling carved out from a life predicated on perpetual flight. Brian's psychological landscape is equally complex. His return to this world forces him to confront the inherent dishonesty of his FBI role. He wears the badge, but his heart remains under the hood of Dom's Charger. The FBI environment, with its sterile procedures and mandated suspicion, serves only to highlight the organic, intuitive trust he shares with Dom. When they are forced to work together, their communication becomes telepathic, a language honed over years of shared near-death experiences. This effortless synergy, particularly during the complex vehicular maneuvers required to secure Verona's assets, suggests that Brian's true calling was never law enforcement. It was being the indispensable right hand to Toretto. The film validates this by showing that the system he serves is ultimately less effective than the loyalty he abandoned. The heist sequence itself functions as a magnificent metaphor for their relationship. They must coordinate perfectly, relying on each other's specific expertise, Brian's tactical positioning, and Dom's sheer driving audacity to overcome superior firepower. The moment they successfully disrupt the convoy, it is a shared victory over external structure. This sequence solidifies the idea that their family operates under a different set of laws, where collective survival trumps individual career paths or government mandates. The emotional apex is not the money they secure, but the moment they realize they have pulled it off together, uncompromised. The decision at the very end to let Dom escape is the most pivotal character moment for Brian. It is the final, irreversible break from his former life. By allowing Toretto to vanish, Brian sacrifices his professional future to safeguard his emotional one. This act of willful blindness by the FBI agents, who conveniently miss Dom speeding away, is narratively necessary, suggesting that even the system recognizes the power of this bond, or perhaps simply lacks the will to dismantle it entirely. This film is the definitive statement that the Fast family is self-governing. They operate beyond jurisdiction, accountable only to each other, ensuring that the subsequent saga will involve increasingly larger and more dangerous arenas in which to prove that loyalty. The successful execution of the Verone job and the subsequent divergence of paths solidifies the franchise's core philosophical underpinning, that chosen allegiance is the highest form of currency. This 2009 entry concludes not with a neat resolution, but with a strategic dispersal, recognizing that keeping Dom and Brian physically separate for a time is the only way to protect the fragile peace they have won. Dom, finally free from immediate legal threat, is now burdened by the knowledge of what he costs those he loves. His departure into the anonymity he seeks is tinged with a deep, unspoken melancholy, a Toretto signature. He can never truly enjoy the spoils of freedom because his very existence demands vigilance and constant self-exile. Brian's return to a semblance of normalcy with Mia is predicated on a foundational deception. Walker excels at portraying the quiet anxiety of a man who knows he is living on borrowed time. Every shared look with Mia, every attempt to build a legitimate life, is shadowed by the possibility that Dom's reappearance, or any future crisis, will shatter their carefully constructed facade. His commitment to Mia is sincere, yet it is constantly being tested by the pull of his primal connection to Dom. This dynamic introduces a potent dramatic irony. Brian sought legitimacy to earn Mia, but his greatest act of loyalty to his family involved actively undermining the structure of the law he supposedly serves. The genius of this chapter lies in its structural efficiency. It functions as an origin story for the heist methodology that will become the series' staple, transforming the protagonists from street racers into highly specialized operatives. They are no longer just running from the cops. They are running sophisticated operations that manipulate law enforcement and criminal enterprises simultaneously. The tangible, kinetic feel of the car chases, the raw engine sounds, the physical sensation of the vehicles retains the flavor of the earlier films, serving as a necessary anchor while the narrative ambition swells. This grounding prevents the audience from dismissing the later, more outlandish stunts as mere fantasy. They are presented as extensions of the competence proven here under pressure. Ultimately, Fast Five, the film that followed, would capitalize on the tactical blueprint laid down here. The fact that they acquired substantial, untraceable wealth during the Verone operation, while subtle in its reveal, is the silent promise of their future capability. It signifies that they are no longer reliant on petty criminal endeavors or government favors. They possess the seed capital for global operations. This film is the quiet, pivotal moment where the stakes are raised from personal freedom to systemic disruption, all secured by the unwavering, almost theological belief in the concept of family superseding all earthly codes. The lasting impact of this 2009 entry resides significantly in how it redefined the concept of stakes within the franchise. Before this film, the jeopardy was largely personal: jail time, losing a race, or disappointing a loved one. Here, the stakes become institutional. By effectively neutralizing a major player like Carter Verone, Dom and Brian demonstrated an ability to operate outside established power structures, an act that carries exponentially greater risk than simple street-level crime. This realization transforms Dom from a fugitive seeking quiet evasion into a strategic asset, or threat, on a much larger chessboard. Vin Diesel masterfully communicates this shift. The simmering anger in his eyes is no longer just about being wronged by the system, but about realizing the sheer scale of influence he must possess, or acquire, to survive against such entities. The film's dedication to vehicular choreography during the climax, the coordinated ambush of the armored convoy, is a clear precursor to the complex team maneuvers seen in later installments. It showcases a level of synchronized driving that implies years of unspoken practice and mutual risk assessment. This sequence isn't just car chasing. It's a mechanized siege where the vehicles are extensions of the driver's wills. The sheer mechanical stress on those classic cars, pushed beyond their factory limits, mirrors the psychological stress on Brian as he perfectly executes maneuvers that will inevitably jeopardize his FBI status. It is a physical manifestation of his divided loyalties, where every successful turn of the wheel is a step further away from his badge. Furthermore, the film successfully solidifies the notion that the crew functions as a highly effective, albeit unofficial, intelligence unit. Their ability to plan, execute, and extract themselves cleanly from a high-stakes domestic operation suggests a professional competency that rivals legitimate agencies. Elena Neves's arc, though brief, hints at the potential for external recruitment based on sheer capability rather than pre-existing trust. She witnesses the raw power of their bond and the effectiveness of their methods, making her an inadvertent recruiter for the necessary, ethically flexible expertise the crew will require as they move into international territory. This chapter is the franchise's declaration that loyalty is the ultimate strategic advantage. The emotional core, the preservation of the Toretto-O'Connor brotherhood, is the engine that justifies all subsequent transgressions against global security. The relative quiet following the final escape is deceptive. It is not peace, but the calm before the storm. A period where the characters consolidate their gains and tacitly accept that they have crossed a threshold from which there is no meaningful return to normalcy. They are now professional disruptors, bound by an oath stronger than any national flag or legal precedent. The quietude following the successful disruption of Carter Verone's network is not rest. It is the necessary triage after an internal surgical procedure. Dom has been reintegrated, but the operation has fundamentally altered the patient. The film excels at showing that even in temporary freedom, the Toretto paradigm breeds instability. Dom's character is further defined by a stubborn refusal to adapt to any life that doesn't demand constant, high-stakes defense of his periphery. He cannot simply enjoy the spoils. The very act of possessing wealth or stability draws attention, which he views as an existential threat to Mia and Brian. This forms the core tragedy of Dom Toretto. His greatest strength, unyielding loyalty, is also the insurmountable barrier to his personal happiness. Brian O'Connor's decision to let Dom walk is perhaps the most defining moment of his entire arc in this era. It is the moment he fully accepts his spiritual alignment with Dom, even if his professional life remains nominally intact. Paul Walker imbues Brian's farewell with a strained solemnity. He is consciously choosing the thrill of moral clarity over the comfort of bureaucratic legitimacy. This choice is what makes Brian endlessly fascinating. He is the quintessential insider turned necessary outsider, using his knowledge of the system as a weapon for those outside it. He sacrifices the chance for clean redemption to maintain the purity of his bond with Dom, a bond that operates on a higher, non-legal ethical plane. The logistical masterpiece that was the Verone convoy ambush served as an unofficial final exam for the newly formalized structure of their alliance. It demanded a convergence of tactical driving, technological infiltration, provided by the supporting players, and sheer force of will. The film subtly implies that this coordinated, high-risk precision is not something that can be taught in a classroom or learned in an academy. It is an intuitive resonance between the drivers. This seamless execution provides the proof point for the franchise's future narrative engine. If they can pull off this level of coordination domestically against a major cartel, they are certainly capable of handling international espionage, provided they stick together. The lingering shadow of this conclusion is the awareness that they have now made powerful enemies who operate outside the jurisdiction of local law enforcement, the true underworld players. Verone was a visible target. The forces now aware of Dom and Brian's capabilities are nebulous and global. This sets the stage perfectly for the next evolution, where the franchise shifts from reclaiming personal honor to defending the entire family unit from external organized threats. The final imagery is one of forced separation, a necessary dispersal, ensuring that when they inevitably reunite, the reunion will be born from dire, world-spanning necessity rather than mere choice. They are scattered, but their telepathic connection through shared automotive adrenaline remains unbroken, waiting for the next ignition key. The seeds of global operation, subtly sown in the successful extraction from the clutches of Verone, necessitated a change in the protagonists' self-perception. They ceased being mere fugitives or specialized contractors and began morphing into freelance sovereign entities. Dom's freedom, bought at the cost of Brian's professional ease, forces a quiet understanding. They are now operating in a realm where their influence outweighs the authority of most governments. Vin Diesel's portrayal here reflects this dawning awareness. The swagger of the street racer is replaced by the calculating stillness of a man who understands his value and the danger that value attracts. He is the immovable object, and the world, represented by increasingly powerful antagonists, is the relentless force determined to move him. Brian O'Connor's role in orchestrating the perfect escape cements his transition from lawman to reluctant operative. His internal monologue, though rarely voiced, is one of continuous sacrifice. Every moment of calm he shares with Mia is a calculated risk, a brief respite before the inevitable callback to the chaos that only he and Dom can navigate effectively. Paul Walker brings a necessary groundedness to this instability. He is the intellectual foil to Dom's instinct, the one who can anticipate the systemic reaction to their disruption. The shared glances between the two leads during the final moments are not just expressions of camaraderie, they are complex strategic assessments, confirming mutual understanding of the untenable position they have engineered for themselves. The logistical complexity of the convoy heist also introduces the concept of specialized assets beyond mere driving prowess. While Tej Parker's role remains centered on technical support and infrastructure, the film proves that success in this new tier of criminality requires seamless integration of diverse talents, brains, driving skill, and technical expertise, all operating under a single, absolute code of honor. This unity, forged in the heat of the operation, is far more potent than any formal corporate structure. It is an organic network, resistant to infiltration because its security protocols are based on emotional history rather than digital encryption. The resolution of this film is inherently open-ended, functioning more as a contractual clause for future installments than a satisfying period. The acquisition of resources, however subtle, signals their pivot away from fighting for mere survival toward fighting for large-scale strategic dominance. They have proven they can dismantle high-level criminal enterprises. The next logical step is to be the ones dictating the terms of engagement on a global scale. The emotional residue of this chapter is the bittersweet taste of achieved victory that simultaneously guarantees greater future conflict. They earned their freedom, but in doing so, they broadcast their unique, formidable capabilities to the shadows of the world, ensuring that their next challenge will be existential, not merely legal. The transition cemented in this 2009 entry, from localized street battles to sophisticated extra-legal operations, demanded a corresponding evolution in the protagonist's moral calculus. Dom Toretto, having reaffirmed his commitment to family by jeopardizing Brian's career, now carries the heavier mantle of responsibility. His actions are no longer reactive, they are proactive defenses of the perimeter he has drawn around Mia, and by extension, Brian. Vin Diesel plays this burden not as regret, but as a focused resolve. His stoicism in the face of potential capture is the outward manifestation of an internalized pledge. He will absorb all the world's aggression so that his chosen family can find the peace he himself can never inhabit. This quiet martyrdom becomes a central tenet of his character going forward. Brian O'Connor's trajectory is perhaps the most fraught with internal contradiction. He has successfully played the part of the federal agent long enough to extract Dom, but the cost is the erosion of his own integrity. Paul Walker subtly portrays the weight of this compromised position. The ease with which he navigates the FBI bureaucracy now feels like a performance layered over a deep underlying cynicism. He understands the system's limitations better than his superiors, realizing that true justice in their world is achieved through unilateral action rather than due process. His bond with Mia is now inextricably linked to his secret life with Dom. The stability he offers her is fundamentally built upon the foundation of his ongoing deception. The finale, where Dom is allowed to slip away, is a powerful piece of mythological creation. It functions as a tacit agreement between Brian and his colleagues, a silent recognition that some forces are too integrated into the fabric of conflict to be easily neutralized or incarcerated. This narrative choice grants the characters an almost untouchable status, signaling to the audience that the normal rules of engagement no longer apply to them. They are now operating under a different covenant. The very success of the Verone operation, the clean acquisition of untraceable funds amidst the chaos, is the quiet establishment of their future operational budget. They possess the means to fund the next stage of their lives, moving from survival mode to strategic dominance. This film, therefore, serves as the crucible where raw driving talent is forged into strategic operative capability. The emphasis shifts from proving who is the fastest to proving who is the most cohesive unit under maximum pressure. The successful coordination against Verone's armored convoy demonstrates that their specialized skills are transferable to larger, more dangerous arenas. They have successfully transitioned from the tuner scene to the shadow economy, and the final, necessary separation between Dom and Brian is the strategic regrouping required before they step onto the global stage, armed with newfound wealth and proven unbreakable trust. The enforced separation following the Verone resolution leaves a palpable aching void in the narrative space. This is not the clean break of characters moving on to disparate, successful lives. It is the temporary tactical withdrawal of soldiers after a successful skirmish, fully aware that the war is far from over. Dom's chosen path of solitude is less about enjoying liberty and more about insulating those he loves from the inevitable blowback. His silence is an act of protection, a heavy shield against a world that now knows his capabilities. When Dom drives off, there is a profound sense of loss woven into his freedom, the loneliness of the patriarch who must always stand guard from the periphery, never fully able to partake in the domesticity he fights so fiercely to secure for Mia. For Brian, the return to Mia and a life under the watchful, albeit forgiving eye of the FBI is an exercise in sustained high-stakes masquerade. Walker portrays Brian's quiet moments with a restless energy, the need to check his perimeter, the unconscious flinch at sudden noises. He has achieved the facade of normalcy, but the emotional truth is that he is spiritually homeless, belonging fully neither to the structured world of law enforcement nor entirely to the chaotic freedom of Dom's world. His commitment to Mia is genuine, but it is perpetually undermined by the secret knowledge that his greatest act of commitment was defying the very authority he represents. This dual existence creates a magnetic tension, ensuring that the narrative pullback to Dom will be irresistible when the next global threat emerges. The mechanics of the Verone operation, the sheer audacity of using vehicular agility to overcome armored brute force,